16. Altered Flesh. The details of the flying machine were gradually resolved as it approached the ramparts of Dinorban. It was roughly ovoid in shape. A series of flat panels ran around the lower edge and was surmounted by a gleaming dome. It emitted a low droning sound and left behind a slowly dissipating trail of water droplets that gleamed brightly in the rays of the sun. It passed over the valley and then, rapidly descending, it headed towards the wall. "There, you see, Idvort," Griffith said, twisting his hair around his fingers. Gryvny would hardly place himself in the hands of his enemy, would he? "It could be a double bluff, my friend," Idvort counselled. Griffith tugged his hand free from his beard and patted Idvort on the back. "I am glad I do not have a mind like yours, Idvort. Your own cunning makes you read too much into other people's actions. Gryvny is our friend. Clear a space, you men. Clear a space so that Gryvny may return to Dinorban and the embrace of the Land Mother." Idvort shook his head. "We shall see whether he returns as a friend." Stevens pushed his way through the milling soldiers and gazed up at the falling aircraft. The sound rose to a higher pitch as its descent was slowed, and it settled softly onto the rough stone of Dinorban. The door flipped open in the side, and Stevens held his breath, wondering what new marvel would emerge. It was rather a disappointment that a small man in a brown jacket, a garish sweater, and darkly tartaned trousers should be the occupant. He gave a small wave and greeted the crowd. "Hello there. I hadn't expected quite such a reception." Griffith was the first to speak. "Doctor," he choked, This is a surprise." "I don't suppose you thought you'd see me again." "Where's Nwada?" the doctor asked casually. Another man came out. Younger than the first one, wearing jeans and a body warmer, he carried a rifle in one hand and blinked as he emerged into the sunlight. "And Stuart Taylor!" Griffith exclaimed. Stevens pushed his way to the front. "Mr. Taylor the vet?" he asked. "That's right," Stuart replied with some surprise. "I'm Inspector Stevens. I don't know if you recall, but you called me to tell me that you'd found a unicorn." Stuart laughed. "Sounded a bit crackpot at the time." Stevens shrugged and gestured around himself. "Who am I to deny the facts?" Next out was a young girl, dressed like the people of Dinorban. She cowered behind the doctor. "This is Bathsheba," he said. "Her family were killed by demons." "But where is Gryvny?" Griffith asked. "This is his chariot." "I'm here," Gryvny's electronically enhanced voice boomed out. "I am assessing the data regarding the movements of the reject material." "Gryvny, my friend, reject material?" "That's demons to you," Stuart said. The doctor smiled at the onlookers. "We've come to help you." Captain Reese pushed through the crowd. "Why? Why should you want to help us? And why did Gryvny desert us for so long? Why has he only just decided to help us?" There were scattered mutters of agreement. The doctor raised his hands to silence them. "I'm helping because I'm an inveterate interferer, and Gryvny wants the world of Tir Na Nog to continue." "Gryvny is a traitor!" "Reese, stop this foolishness," Griffith commanded. "We have had too much hatred. It is obvious to me that Gryvny was not allowed to help us sooner because Dagda was testing us. Is that not right, Doctor?" "Well, he did have his mind on other things. But we are here to help you now." "Let Gryvny tell us so himself," Reese snarled. "We are here to help you," Gryvny said, stooping to come out of the craft. "Greetings, Griffith." "Greetings, Gryvny. The Tuathar welcomes you." "What are we to do? The demons are preparing to attack." "I suggest that we descend to the ground. We can't do anything about the demons from up here," the doctor said. "Well?" Griffith looked to Gryvny. "The doctor has a good grasp of scientific technique. I am prepared to follow his advice." "Come!" "My lords, Herne approaches!" a soldier shouted. They turned to look and saw that a glowing figure was indeed approaching at some speed. It seems we are all to face the demons together, Driffid said. We cannot let him through the gates, Captain Reese said. Even if Govni does not seek to betray us, we cannot endanger our position further by opening the gates. There are already demons at the walls. Stevens turned from his intense examination of the figure and asked, "Why is he running backwards?" "That's because he moves through time in the opposite direction to everyone else," Stuart told him. "No, it isn't," the doctor said. Stuart gasped. "What?" "When I first met Hearn, he moved in the way one would expect a normal person to move. Govni, has Hearn ever acted like this before?" "There does seem to be something unusual about his gait," Govni admitted. The doctor and Driffid, followed by their companions, descended to the lower tier of the wall so that they could keep Hearn in view. Near to the foot of the wall, he collapsed, and for a moment the light that he emitted grew dim. Hearn lay still. "What's happened to him?" Driffid asked. And then his eyes widened as, suddenly, Hearn rose rapidly towards them. "He's flying," Bathsheba said. "How's he doing that?" "Search me," Stuart said. "Doctor?" "True contratemporal existence, even to the extent of disobeying fundamental laws of physics. Fascinating." "Stand back," the doctor commanded. Hearn appeared over the edge of the wall. The surprise in the eyes of the watchers was mirrored in his. He fell forward into the doctor's arms, and the doctor suddenly felt the temporal field of localized space moving as if it were a carpet being beaten. "I would advise a cautious attitude to the Hearn being," Govni said. "He appears to have lost control of certain of his metabolic processes. His body is releasing random bursts of chronons and antichronons." The doctor supported Hearn away from the edge of the wall and then lowered him to the ground. "Interaction with a body moving in the opposite direction in time. An interesting process. Now we must descend to the ground level and devise a plan to deal with the reject material." "Can we do nothing for Hearn?" asked Driffid. "Govni," the doctor said, "you and I are the only ones who won't be affected by Hearn's unstable state. Help me carry him down." "Very well, but I suggest we hurry. The combined mass of the reject material could present an overwhelming force." They met a messenger hurrying up as they descended through the wall. He was flustered and worried-looking. "My Lord Driffid, some fighting has broken out at the gate. General Noirda and 2 of the Earth people set a wolf on some of the Fairbolg." "What?" "By Dagda, what does Noirda think he's up to? His paranoia has driven him too far. We must stop him." "Earth people?" the doctor asked. "Not a girl about so high propensity for using slang." "A girl and a boy," the messenger agreed. "Why can't you keep out of trouble, Ace? You should have known better than to get involved with Noirda." "What do you mean, Doctor?" "Hadn't you realized, Driffid? Noirda's story about being attacked by demons when he went to see Govni was just nonsense. He was the one who told you that Govni had betrayed you. He was the one who was encouraging you to fight with your fellow creatures. I thought it was obvious. We must get down there as fast as possible. Govni, I have a plan. Let's leave Hearn here. We can deal with him later, or earlier, depending upon your point of view." "They've gone down to the gate," the Furbolg told Driffid, pointing down the tunnel. "We did not want to fire upon him, as we feared it might cause a reopening of hostilities between our peoples. But his beast attacked several of my soldiers." "Beast?" asked the doctor. "Why do you call it that?" "It had the appearance of a wolf, but it was not a wolf. I fear that it was a demon." "A demon?" Driffid asked. "That is impossible. You must be mistaken. I need no more evidence than that which my eyes supplied me with. Do you call me a liar, sir?" The Furbolg's hands went to his weapons. No, of course not. I merely meant—" "Driffid, isn't it obvious that something is amiss with Noirda?" "Has anyone checked his neck recently?" Stuart asked. Driffid was shocked. "You cannot mean that General Noirda is a witch? That would be—" "No!" "Whatever the case, Stuart, I think that we can put your tranquilizers to good use." "But, Doctor, I can't shoot it in there. It's far too dark. I wouldn't stand a chance in hell of hitting anything." You plan to shoot something? Gwivney asked. I can adjust my vision to all wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum. Can you fire a gun? Let me see. He took the rifle and looked at it interestedly. You line the sights up here, Stuart demonstrated, and squeeze this trigger. It seems simple enough. What are we waiting for, then? Let's do it. Wait, Stuart, the doctor said. I'll come with you. Just let me organise things down here. Gwivney, will the transmat be affected if we dig up the stones and position them on the opposite walls of this tunnel? The coordinate settings would have to be altered. Yes, that's obvious. We don't want to send the demons to Earth. You must reprogram them so that they replace the demons in the storage module. That will be easy. Good. Driffid, can you arrange for the 2 largest stones in the circle to be brought here? Yes, I'll see to it right away, but don't argue, just do it. Doctor, Gwivney interrupted, the transmat must be deactivated before they can be moved. I can do that. You must go and deal with Nwada. Stuart, you go with him. I'll come too, Stevens said. The doctor looked puzzled. Who are you? Stevens was slightly crestfallen that his presence had been overlooked. Inspector Stevens, Scotland Yard, Paranormal Investigations Team. You've heard of me? No, the doctor shook his head, but I'm sure I will. He patted his pockets and took out the spare tranquilizer darts. Here you are, Gwivney. You'd better take these. You may need them. He pressed them into Gwivney's outstretched hand and turned to Driffid. Come along. There's very little time to lose. At first it was only a trickle. The fleet of foot, the better positioned, those who had been prepared. But before long they poured onto the plain in front of Dinorban. A mass of distorted limbs, misshapen torsos, swollen faces with serrated teeth ready to rip and tear and chew. Some ran on 4 legs, others flew. Those which had been human occasionally took stumbling steps on 2 legs. All of them moved towards Dinorban. The most horrifying thing about them was not the way their bodies sprouted uncontrollably, nor was it the way, occasionally, one would absorb another to make itself more powerful, leaving behind ashen, brittle remains. The most horrifying thing about them, as Ace would later tell the doctor, was the terrible turmoil in their minds, 1,000 minds crying out with an evil and loathing which even a telepathic inept could sense. Every one was psychotic, disturbed because of the living infection that encompassed their bodies and souls. They ran with murderous intent and bayed for blood. Inside the encampment, the Shay waited nervously, their bushy tails flicking back and forth in distracted movements. The Firbolg polished their swords and made honourable pacts between families. Even the Formois, their minds dulled by the soporific events of the reborn sun, stirred restlessly. No worse fate could be conceived than to look on helplessly as others were slaughtered. Stuart and Inspector Stevens followed Gwivney into the dangerous blackness of the tunnel. A single torch burnt smokily at the entrance, and Stuart took it from its bracket. Orange and red reflections shimmered up and down Gwivney's side. Stuart suddenly shivered at the thought of what the alien might look like inside his protective suit. But, even more so, what lay at the end of the tunnel sent a chill wave across his flesh. The small amount of light afforded by the torch made the darkness ahead seem all the more dense. Animal sounds emanated from the darkness, and there was a crunching underfoot. Stuart looked down briefly, bones, and then concentrated on what was before him. "Can you see anything?" he asked quietly. "My perceptive functioning is slightly marred by the heat source you are carrying, but I can detect 3 small organisms and 1 large organism. I would suggest that you extinguish your firebrand so that they do not have so much warning of our presence. I should go on alone." The 2 men exchanged a glance. Both wanted to continue. Stuart dropped the torch to the ground where it sputtered out. "No, we'll keep with you." Stevens panicked momentarily at the silence and the thought that Gwivney might have slipped away, but his eyes rapidly adjusted and picked out the thin shape beside him. "Follow then. In front of them, they heard a loud impact and the groan of wood under stress. "They're trying to break open the doors," Stuart observed. "Can you shoot from here? My chances of disabling them would be appropriately high." "Well, what are you waiting for?" hissed Stevens. "Who's there?" Stevens recognised Jack's voice. "Stay back, they're dangerous." "Professor, is that you?" a girl's voice asked. "Wanda and David have changed into—" Her voice was cut off by a growl of rage. Stuart heard the explosive outlet of gases as one of the tranquilizer darts was unleashed. "Protect yourselves," Goivni advised. Stuart dropped to the earth. A huge shape ploughed forwards out of the darkness. Another of the darts was fired, not slowing the behemoth's advance at all. Stuart cringed, half in terror and half in helplessness, as he heard a strange electronic scream erupt from Goivni's throat. The monster flung itself from side to side, crushing the alien. One foot dug into the earth by Stuart's head, sending splatters of mud, he hoped it was mud, across his face. Still Goivni screamed, and Stuart found that he had backed up against the wall of the tunnel. He had to do something, despite his loathing of both the alien and the attacking monster. His hand closed around a bone. Some distant part of his mind, locked in an anatomy lecture, reeled off "fractured pelvis of immature stallion," and he prepared to use it as a weapon. The message had gone ahead of them, so that when the doctor and Drifford arrived, the earth around the bases of the stones was already being removed. "Careful," cautioned the doctor. "If you don't know what you're doing with these things, they can be terribly dangerous." He was of the opinion that they were dangerous even when you did know what you were doing. If the silicon circuits were overloaded, for example, by too many people travelling simultaneously, there could be some random mixing of conformations, unpleasant if you didn't enjoy looking like someone else. He stepped up to the first stone and examined its surface closely. It was like peering into infinite space with the light of distant, long burnt-out stars only just penetrating the night. He pressed his fingers to the stone, and the muscles of the distal phalangeal joint rippled almost inconsequentially, except that the lights within the stone winked out. He repeated the procedure with the other stone. "They should be safe now," he told the workers. "Carry on," Drifford commanded. He stood back with the doctor and watched the work proceed. One of the circle guards came towards them, bearing a roll of parchment. "Message from Captain Reese, sir," the man said. Drifford reached out to take the message, but the fool released his hold too soon, and it dropped to the floor. Drifford bent to pick it up. "Look out!" one of the labourers cried. The guard was moving forward. Bent over, Drifford could only stumble backwards to avoid the flash of the weapon. But it wasn't aimed at Drifford. The doctor parried the blade with his forearm, and then his index finger stabbed out against his attacker's temple. The man slowed, but wasn't hampered much by the blow. His fist slammed into the doctor's side and sent him reeling to one side. Knife clenched tightly, he followed on foot, but the doctor was ready this time. His fingers pressed into the skin above and below the guard's clavicle, felling him immediately. On the ground, his muscles twitched spasmodically. Drifford inched forward and peered down at the man's neck. "A witch in our midst," he sighed sadly. "And how many more? He must be burnt." "No," said the doctor. But already men were moving forward, splashing oil on the prone figure. And then a flame was touched to the oil. The flickering tongue spread quickly as the man began to thrash about. He pushed himself up with his arms and raised his face pleadingly to the doctor. His skin bulged, and grey tissue burst through, forming waving pseudopodia which strained to be free of the fire. The guard collapsed face down to the ground, and his roasting arms embraced his head, stopping the protoplasm escaping. Finally, he stopped moving. That was unnecessary, the doctor told Drifford. But there was no anger in his voice. If anything, there had been a touch of calculating thoughtfulness. David struggled to regain control of his aching muscles, stretched into terrible new permutations. From the direction of the tall figure, he heard a sharp outlet of air, followed by a soft thud. As Nuada surged forward, his grip on David's mind suddenly released. David's altered, animal eyes danced hungrily between the cowering forms of Jack and Ace. The creature within him, altered by congress with other creatures, had learnt certain principles. Protect your own and protect your home. The contact with Nuada had revealed something of Nuada's plans. He had originally hoped to transport the demons through to Earth, a rich hunting ground in the midst of the men of Tir na Nog. But now the plan was changed. The pathway to Earth threatened, and no time could be lost. The Earth would suffer. And the Earth was David's home. He turned to face Nuada. Almost as clear as the day, he could see the scattered remains of the centaurs. He had dragged them into the tunnel for Nuada to absorb, so that he could become the depraved monstrosity that swayed back and forth with the limp, silver-suited figure clenched between the claws on his forefeet. Inspector Stevens lay in a daze alongside Nuada's heavy tail, and another human crouched by the wall, fumbling with a piece of bone from which tattered shreds of muscle and tendon still hung. David shivered inside, but the creature sprang forward and buried its teeth into Nuada's neck. Nuada let out a roar of such pain and magnitude that David felt his eardrums bulge inwards, almost to breaking point. The scream reverberated across the enclosed space. Nuada dropped Gwivney and struggled to flail round at the back of his neck. His first wild blow crashed into the wall of the tunnel, crushing his hand to pulp. David dug his teeth further in and felt the warm spurt of blood against his palate. The muscles at the back of Nuada's neck tensed, squeezing at his jaw, and in a rapid movement he flung himself over onto his back, trying to flatten David. Still, David gripped tightly. He found a foothold in the mud and tugged backwards. With a satisfying tearing of flesh, one of Nuada's vertebrae was ripped out with a chunk of soft tissue. Nuada stiffened, all the nervous pathways to his limbs cut off. Only his head still moved, and in its dying moments it whipped round and crashed against David's skull, plummeting him painfully into unconsciousness. Several of the Furbolg allowed themselves to be put into harnesses. The situation was so extreme that the capriciousness of horses could not be allowed to play any part. Thick ropes were passed around the stones, and the Firbolg began to pull. The slippery mud, whilst hampering them to some extent, also facilitated the passage of the stones, and once speed was attained, their own momentum kept them moving. As they were approaching the tunnel through the wall, Stewart and Stevens emerged, carrying the unmoving body of Gwivney. Ace and Jack were close behind. Between them, they carried a distorted figure, half human, half beast. The doctor hurried forward to meet them. "Ace, what have you been up to?" he asked harshly, but not concealing the relief in his voice. "Professor!" Ace ran to him and hugged him. The doctor grinned in embarrassment. "Thanks for leaving me. I knew you'd be all right, and that you'd get back here." "Who's this?" asked Jack. "It's the Professor. Professor, this is Jack, and this is Inspector Stevens." "Yes, we've already met." "And this is David." She pointed to the poor, deformed creature on the floor. The doctor knelt by him and ran his fingers lightly across the altered flesh. "Doctor," Stewart said, "Gwivney's injured. He was attacked by that thing in there." "But we need him," the doctor groaned. He turned to look at the people of Tir na Nog. Some of them were looking at David with fire in their eyes. "Don't touch him," he warned. "I don't want him hurt." "Position the stones on either side of the entrance," he commanded. He looked back at David. "Can anything be done for him?" Ace asked. "He's infected by Gwivney's protoplasmic material. His body and mind have been taken over by the alien presence." "He's possessed?" asked Stevens. "Maybe I can help. I have some experience with these things. Perhaps I could form an exorcism?" "I haven't got time to deal with him now," the doctor told Ace. "Come with me. I'll need your help." He led her over to the stones which were now in place. "Once I've reactivated the transmat device, You must keep your fingers pressed against it in the way that I will show you. Driffid, he turned to the leader of the Tuatha. Send some men to be prepared to open the gates when I give the word. Very well. Now then, the doctor pressed his fingers against the stone. Doubt crept into his expression, and he looked closely at the dark rock. Should something have happened? Ace asked. Too many things to remember, he complained. Without the keying code, I'll need a power source to reactivate the stones. A mighty crash came from the far end of the tunnel. They've nearly broken through, Doctor, Stuart called. No time. The doctor searched his pockets. Nothing. He strode over to Grivney. Gwivney, he whispered urgently. Gwivney, how can I reactivate the stones? The keying code is different to the deactivation sequence. Use... Gwivney's electronic voice was weak and distorted. Use the energy from my flyer. There's no time to disconnect it and link it up again. The demons are almost through the gates. Gwivney didn't seem to be listening. So much pain. Insufficient endorphin release. Doctor, will you supervise the Turnog experiment? It can supervise itself, Gwivney. Show me the keying code. Death, whispered Gwivney. An unexplored realm, uncharted, beyond empirical definition. If I could record the results, it would make a great experiment. Use the power pack from my respirator, Doctor. Show me the keying code. We can take you over to the stones. There is no keying code. I never anticipated having to reactivate them. Another fault in my technique. Still, the new procedure awaits. If I can get you back to the TARDIS, I can give you medical treatment. There was an almost messianic gleam in Gwivney's eyes. No time. Use it, Doctor. His arms somehow found the energy to reach up and snap open the seals on his helmet, letting in a rush of the unfamiliar, unfriendly atmosphere. This will provide excellent material for a research paper on the subject of mortality. His unenhanced voice croaked weakly. Only medium material, the doctor said sadly. The doctor looked at the alien's revealed face. It could almost be human, but for the pale green tint of the skin and the gills waving weakly in the air. When they stopped moving, he reached into the suit and felt about for the respirator. It came loose easily. Gwivney is dead? Asked Driffid. I'm afraid so. The doctor hurried to the stones, rapidly disconnecting the power pack from the respirator. He did care for Tir Na Nog. He pressed the power pack against the side of the first stone and let it discharge some of its energy. The galaxy within the rock flared into life. Where shall we send them to? The doctor mused. He took out his pocket watch and flipped it open. Without Gwivney, the artificial sun will need some extra fuel to keep it going. I suppose... Conflicting emotions raged in his mind. Wholesale destruction of life? Could it be justified? He raised his pocket watch and sighted along its diameter at the sun. It emitted a high-pitched bleep, and a row of figures appeared on its small digital screen. He turned back to the stone, and taking Ace's hands, he positioned them on its surface. Keep them steady, no matter what happens. There you are, Professor! He hurried across to the other stone. They're through! A voice called. The sound of baying howls echoed up the tunnel. The doctor fumbled the power pack against the stone and released its package of energy. Just as the first demon, its jaws wide and claws outstretched, reached the mouth of the tunnel, he pressed his fingers against the stone, rediverting the flow of information. The rather surprised-looking head and shoulders of the beast were carried forward, but the rest of it had vanished. "Wicked!" shouted Ace, her enthusiasm momentarily getting the better of her. "Keep still, Ace!" The demons kept coming, a menagerie sewn together haphazardly, gangling limbs with tough sinews and wiry tendons, a torso with a heart that bulged outside the ribs and thumped a triple beat, heads without nostrils and mouth, but with insect eyes, claws readied for killing, stained yellow and red, faces which might once have belonged to humans. All were disintegrated by the power of the semi-organic silicate transfer device. So eager to get into Dinorban were they, that the ranks at the back pushed the front line forward to their doom. Not all of the demons came through, though, but the few that remained would be hunted down by the people of Tir Nanog. Some managed to get through the doctor's trap when Ace allowed her position to be taken over by another because she had grown weary. In the brief moment when contact with the stone was lost, 2 demons had passed through, but the Firbolg had rapidly dealt with them with flashing swords. At the end of 2 hours, it was over.